The Curse of Thornshade House, Part 2. Chapter 13, The Ghost in Her Veins. The darkness inside the bedroom was different from the darkness in the cellar, heavier, suffocating in a way that made Olivia's breath feel too loud, too uneven, too alive. She lay beneath the heavy covers, her body still, her hands clenched against the cool silk of her nightgown, her pulse hammering beneath her skin, her mind churning with everything she knew, everything she had seen, everything she had just barely survived. The house was silent now, but not the kind of silence that meant peace, it was the kind that came before something woke up. The kind that settled when someone was watching. Beside her, Edmund's breathing was slow, steady, rhythmic, the pattern of a man who had nothing to fear, nothing to doubt, nothing to confess. He had kissed her goodnight, his lips lingering just slightly against her temple, his fingers trailing lightly down her spine before he turned away, before he let sleep claim him as easily as if nothing at all had happened. But Olivia knew better now. She knew what the key meant. She knew what Elise had tried to tell her. Edmund had locked her inside that cellar knowing what was waiting for her down there, knowing that the dead still lived beneath this house, knowing that if she found them, they would not let her go. But she had escaped. For now. And the house did not forget. The weight of the locket pressed against her chest, a cold, solid thing, tucked beneath the fabric of her gown, hidden but still present, still pulsing, still whispering against her skin like a heartbeat that did not belong to her. She should not have taken it. She should have left it buried beneath the thorns, beneath the earth, beneath the place where Elise had been forced to stay. But she couldn't. Because the locket wasn't just a relic of the past, it was a message. A name carved into silver, a name that should have been spoken, a name that Edmund had not bothered to erase because he had never needed to. No one had ever asked. No one had ever looked. Until Olivia. The thought sent a cold shiver through her limbs, her fingers twitching against the sheets as she forced herself to stay still, to breathe evenly, to pretend that she was asleep, that she had not just pulled herself from the grave Edmund had tried to bury her in. She could not let him know. Not yet. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, the only sound in the vast bedroom, its hands moving sluggishly through the night, each second stretching into eternity, each breath heavier than the last. Something was wrong. The air shifted. Olivia knew it before she even opened her eyes, before the weight settled against her skin, before the cold wrapped around her wrists like invisible hands pressing her deeper into the mattress. The room was not empty. Something was here. Slowly, carefully, she cracked her eyes open, her vision adjusting to the dim glow of the dying fire, the shadows flickering along the walls, stretching long and thin, too long, too thin. The space beyond the bed was still, untouched, the grand furniture cast in soft, wavering light, the heavy curtains drawn tight against the outside world. But she was not alone. A breath. Just above her. Too faint to be Edmund's. Too wrong to belong to the living. A presence loomed above her, a shadow darker than the rest, a figure standing beside the bed. Olivia's body screamed at her to move, to turn, to run, but she couldn't, wouldn't, not until she knew what it was, who it was. The air grew colder, thick with something unseen, something waiting, something patient and heavy and full of sorrow. The whisper came slow, soft, curling beneath her ear, threading through her mind, slipping into her ribs like a voice that had lived inside her for centuries. Olivia. Her breath caught, her throat tightening, her pulse slamming against her ribs, but she did not flinch, did not move, did not scream. It knew her name. It had always known her name. Slowly, so painfully slowly, she turned her head, the world tilting around her as the shadows breathed, as the cold deepened, as the presence beside her took shape. And then, she saw her. Elise. Not in the garden, not in the cellar, not a distant ghost trapped within the walls of Thornshade House. But here. Beside her bed. Watching. Weeping. Waiting. Olivia's breath left her in a sharp, fractured exhale, her fingers curling into the sheets as she fought the urge to recoil, to flinch, to run, but Elise did not move, did not reach for her, did not vanish like a dream slipping between the cracks of waking. She was real. Too real. Her dark hair was tangled and damp, her gown torn, her hands trembling at her sides, but her face was wrong. Pale, hollow, her lips barely parted as if frozen mid-scream, her eyes sunken and black with something that did not belong to the living. She had been left to rot. But she had not left this house. The locket against Olivia's chest burned. Elisa's gaze dropped to it, her dark eyes flickering, the weight of her presence growing heavier, pressing against Olivia's ribs, filling her lungs, filling the space between them with something thick, something that should not have existed in the world of the living. And then, Elise moved. Not with footsteps, not with sound, but in a way that made the room grow smaller, the walls lean inward, the fire flicker violently, the air pull tight like the moment before a storm breaks. She reached for Olivia. And the moment her fingers touched her wrist, Olivia was no longer in the bedroom. The walls shifted, the air rippled, and suddenly she was falling, falling, the scent of roses and earth filled her lungs, damp, thick, choking, pressing against her skin like soil burying her alive, her limbs thrashing, her breath struggling, the darkness curling around her like thorns wrapping tight against her throat. She gasped, clawing, reaching, but there was nothing to grab onto, nothing to hold, nothing to save her, and then she saw it. A wedding gown. Torn, stained, discarded. Half buried in the dirt. Olivia's pulse stilled. It was not just any gown. It was Elisa's. The one she had been wearing the night she had died. The one Edmund had given her. The ground trembled, a sharp, violent quake that rattled through Olivia's bones, through the world around her, through the echoes of the past that had not yet been silenced. And then, she heard the scream. Not hers. Not Edmund's. Elisa's. A wail of sorrow, of rage, of something that had been taken, something that had been destroyed, something that had been left to rot beneath the weight of a house that would not let her rest. And just before Olivia was pulled back, just before the room around her snapped into place, before she was yanked back into her own body, back into the present, back into the warmth of the bed that no longer felt safe, she saw something else. A hand. Emerging from the earth. Reaching for her. And then, Olivia woke up screaming. But when she opened her eyes, when her breath finally returned, when she sat upright with a violent gasp, heart hammering, skin drenched in cold sweat, Edmund was already awake. Sitting beside her. Watching. And for the first time, he did not smile. Chapter 14, Beneath the Roses. Olivia's scream still echoed in the corners of the room, fading into the silence like a whisper swallowed by the walls, her breath coming in sharp, uneven bursts, her hands clenched into the heavy blankets as she tried to separate dream from reality, past from present, memory from something else, something not her own. But before she could fully regain herself, before she could pull her thoughts from the vision of Elisa's wedding gown buried in the earth, of her outstretched hand reaching from the grave, of the scream that was not hers, the weight of another presence pressed against her ribs like a second heartbeat, steady, waiting, watching. Edmund. He sat beside her, perfectly still, his back resting against the carved wooden headboard, the flickering candlelight casting deep shadows across his face, making him look impossibly sharp, impossibly unreadable, impossibly calm. His dark eyes traced her, his expression quiet, expectant, patient. He had been watching her long before she had woken, long before the scream had left her lips, long before she had gasped herself into waking, back into the place where she was supposed to feel safe, into his arms, his home, his bed. But she did not feel safe. Not anymore. Maybe not ever. Olivia forced herself to breathe, to steady the trembling in her limbs, to still the hammering of her pulse that screamed too loud, too fast, too exposed in the silence between them. She needed to speak, needed to explain what had just happened, needed to find the right words, the right lie, the right way to keep herself from slipping further into whatever trap Edmund had begun weaving around her the moment she had stepped into Thornshade House. But before she could part her lips, before she could decide what to say, he spoke first. "You were dreaming," he murmured, his voice soft, smooth, even, as if his words alone could smooth over the jagged edges of her panic, as if he could take what had just happened and turn it into something small, something insignificant, something meaningless. Olivia swallowed hard, forcing herself to nod, to play along, to pretend he had not been watching her before she woke. "Yes," she breathed, her voice unsteady, her fingers gripping the fabric of her gown as if it could anchor her to the present, to reality, to something that made sense. "A nightmare." Edmund's gaze did not waver, did not blink, did not flicker with sympathy or concern or fear. He did not ask her what she had seen. Did not reach for her, did not press a comforting hand against hers the way a husband should when his wife woke up screaming in the dead of night. Instead, he simply tilted his head slightly, his lips curling into something that was almost, but not quite, a smile. Was it? The air shifted, the space between them growing impossibly thin, impossibly cold, impossibly charged with something unspoken, something that had been buried in the dark, something that had been waiting for her to find it. Olivia's stomach twisted, the echo of Elisa's voice still lingering in her mind, the image of her ghost standing beside her bed, whispering her name, reaching for her, pressing a vision into her skull that did not belong to her. Or had it? Her pulse stuttered, her skin prickling, the weight of the locket pressing into her chest beneath the layers of silk and lace, grounding her, reminding her that this was not just a nightmare, not just a dream, not just a figment of her imagination. It had been real. Elise had shown her the truth. And Edmund knew it. But Olivia was not ready to let him know what she had seen. Not yet. Not when she was still piecing it together herself, not when the locket still held secrets she had yet to unlock, not when she was still standing on the precipice of a story that had not yet finished writing itself. Not when she did not yet know how it would end. So she swallowed the panic, forced a soft, breathless laugh, shaking her head as if to brush it all away, as if to make herself small, fragile, breakable. "Yes," she murmured, dropping her gaze, letting her shoulders sink slightly, playing the part she knew he wanted her to play. "Just a dream. A lie. A careful, dangerous lie." And Edmund knew it. He had to. His eyes flickered over her, unreadable, thoughtful, but he did not press her, did not push, did not force the truth from her lips as she had expected. Instead, he exhaled slowly, reaching forward, his fingers brushing against her cheek, tucking a loose strand of hair behind her ear in a gesture that should have been tender, intimate, loving. But it felt like a warning. "You must be exhausted," he murmured, his voice still impossibly soft, impossibly controlled, impossibly certain. "You should rest." The words felt like chains, slipping around her wrists, her ankles, her throat, pulling her back down, back into the place where he wanted her to stay, back into the role she was supposed to play. But Olivia did not want to sleep. Not now. Not when the moment she closed her eyes, she would see Elise again. She forced a small, tired smile, nodding once, slipping beneath the covers as if she had surrendered, as if she had let it go, as if she was not still holding the truth inside her like a hidden blade. And Edmund let her. He kissed her forehead, slow, deliberate, lingering, his fingers pressing against her skin for just a second too long before he finally turned away, settling beneath the blankets beside her, his breath evening out, his body relaxing as if nothing had ever happened. But Olivia did not close her eyes. Did not sleep. Could not. Not when the house was still whispering. Not when the locket was still cold against her chest. Not when Elise was still waiting. Not when she had seen the truth beneath the roses. The grave was not empty. Elise had been buried. But she had not been buried alone. Chapter 15, Buried Together. The house did not sleep. Even as Edmund's breathing slowed beside her, even as the silence stretched long and deep, even as the weight of the blankets pressed against her chest like unseen hands, Olivia knew the house was still awake. The air felt heavier now, thick with something unseen, something breathing through the walls, something waiting just beyond the veil of candlelight and shadow. The locket against her chest was cold, an anchor, a reminder, a piece of the past that refused to be silenced. Beneath the covers, her fingers traced its delicate edge, feeling the weight of it, the truth of it, the message Elise had left behind. Edmund had known she would find it. He had known she would see the grave. He had wanted her to. But why? What game was he playing? What did he believe she would do? What had he done? Olivia did not want to close her eyes. Did not want to slip into the place between waking and sleep, where Elise would find her again, where the whispers would crawl through the darkness, where the hands of the dead would reach for her, pressing against her wrists, against her throat, pulling her down, down, down into the earth where they had been left to rot. She had seen too much and still not enough. The grave in the cellar had been opened, but Elise had not been alone. There had been another. A second space. A second body. A second name Elise had not been able to speak before she vanished into the mist, before she dissolved into the house, before the candlelight flickered and the cellar door locked behind her. Who? Who else had been buried in Thornshade House? Who had Edmund erased? Who had died before Olivia ever arrived? Her fingers curled around the locket, gripping it so tightly that the edges pressed into her palm, sharp, grounding, real. She could not stay here. Not like this. Not waiting for Edmund to decide what came next. Not waiting for the house to decide for her. Not waiting for Elise to return. She needed proof. Needed something stronger than whispers and shadows and the cold touch of ghosts in the night. Needed something that could not be buried again. Carefully, she turned her head, glancing at Edmund's sleeping form, his breath steady, his face calm, his hands resting loosely against the sheets as if he had not locked her in the cellar, as if he had not smiled when he told her Elise had died, as if he was not a man who had already done this before. Olivia held her breath, waiting, counting, listening. Waiting for the moment she knew he was truly asleep. The clock on the mantel ticked softly, each sound stretching through the silence, marking the slow passage of time, marking the narrowing space between her decision and her escape. Now. She slipped out of bed, moving carefully, her bare feet meeting the cold floor, her breath catching as she straightened, waiting for a shift, for a sound, for the slow unfurling of movement beside her. But Edmund did not stir. Not yet. She swallowed, forcing herself to move, forcing herself to not hesitate, to not let fear root her in place, to not let the walls whisper her back into stillness. She needed to go back. To the cellar. To the grave. To the other body buried beneath the house. The thought sent a violent shudder through her, but she did not stop. The locket felt heavy in her palm as she crept across the room, her fingers brushing the cool metal of the doorknob, twisting it slowly, carefully, soundlessly. The door opened with a soft click, and she slipped into the hallway, the air colder out here, thicker, watching. The house had changed again. It always did at night. The candle sconces along the walls flickered weakly, their flames swaying in an unseen wind, the portrait staring down at her, their painted eyes gleaming, the air humming with something just beneath the surface, something she could not name but could feel pressing against her skin. She moved quickly, following the familiar path, turning the same corners, stepping over the same warped floorboards, her breath steady but sharp, her pulse hammering against her ribs. The house felt too still, too silent, too aware of her presence. But she did not stop. She reached the cellar door and hesitated. Not because she was afraid. Not because she doubted herself. But because the door was already unlocked. A cold, sharp dread unfurled in her chest, tightening around her lungs, wrapping around her throat. Someone had already been here. Someone had already opened the grave. The whispering returned. Low, urgent, threading through the darkness like fingers curling around her wrist, pulling her forward. She gritted her teeth and pushed the door open. The cellar stairs stretched before her, steep, narrow, disappearing into the abyss below, where the air was damp, thick, heavy with the scent of earth and something deeper, something rotting beneath the surface. She took a step. Then another. Then another. The air pressed against her shoulders, against her back, against her throat, wrapping around her like the unseen hands she had felt in her sleep, like the memory of Elise standing beside her bed, like the moment before the nightmare swallowed her whole. But this was not a dream. This was real. She reached the bottom, her breath shallow, her pulse an unsteady drum against her ribs. The candle she had left behind was still there, but its wick was blackened, burned out, the wax melted and cooled, forgotten. And in front of her, the grave. The mound of earth that had held Elise. And beside it, the second grave had been opened. Olivia's breath hitched, her knees locking, her body refusing to move forward even as her mind screamed for her to look, to see, to understand. The dirt was disturbed, scattered across the stone floor, the wooden marker that had once stood beside it knocked to the side, broken in half. But it was not the grave itself that made her stomach twist. It was what was missing. The body was gone. Olivia staggered back, a choked sound catching in her throat, her hands flying to her mouth, her pulse slamming against her skull as the realization shattered through her like a wave of ice, sharp and endless and suffocating. Someone had taken the body. But who? The air shifted. A floorboard groaned. She was not alone. Olivia turned sharply, her breath catching, her body locking in place as she felt it. A presence. Watching. Waiting. And then, Edmund stepped from the shadows. Calm. Unbothered. Smiling. Her stomach lurched, her pulse a hammering, frantic thing as he took a slow step forward, as the candlelight flickered wildly against the sharp planes of his face, as his eyes met hers and did not blink. He had known she would come here. He had been waiting. Olivia tried to speak, tried to force words past the tightness in her throat, tried to demand answers, but before she could, Edmund tilted his head, his lips curling in amusement. "You really should stop looking where you don't belong," he murmured, his voice low, quiet, almost affectionate. Almost. And behind him, something moved. Olivia's blood turned to ice. Because the body that had been buried beside Elise was not missing. It was standing. And it was coming toward her. Chapter 16, The Dead Do Not Rest. The breath locked in Olivia's throat, her pulse slamming against her ribs in violent, erratic bursts, her body frozen between Edmund's quiet, patient amusement and the figure that had begun to move in the darkness behind him. The grave had been open. The body had been missing. And now, it was standing. Rising. Coming toward her. Olivia's legs refused to obey her, the air thick and unmoving, pressing against her chest, against her throat, against every instinct screaming at her to run, run, run. But she could not. Because this was not just a body. It was something else. Something that had been dead for a long, long time. The figure was tall, gaunt, draped in a tattered veil of shadow and rot, the remnants of a wedding gown hanging from its skeletal frame, the lace blackened with time, with earth, with something far worse than decay. Its head tilted slowly, impossibly slow, its jaw slack, its fingers curling at its sides, long, bony, claw-like, and when Olivia saw its eyes, empty sockets, hollow and dark, staring, searching, knowing, her breath failed completely. It was Elise. Or what was left of her. But no, Elise's body had still been in her grave. Elise had still been beneath the earth, still whispering, still reaching, still warning. So who was this? Who had been buried beside her? The thing took a step forward, slow, deliberate, its bones shifting beneath its ruined gown, its breath, oh, God, it was breathing. A low, rattling exhale, a sound that did not belong to the living, a sound that scraped against Olivia's spine like nails dragging across stone. It was coming for her. Her pulse slammed in her ears, her hands shaking violently at her sides, but she did not move, did not run, because Edmund was still there. Watching. Waiting. Smiling. He had not turned to face it. Had not flinched. Had not reacted at all. Because he already knew it was there. What is this? Olivia's voice was barely a whisper, hoarse, broken, torn from the very center of her terror. Edmund's eyes gleamed in the dim candlelight, his lips still curled in that damnably calm, infuriating smile, the kind of expression a man wore when he already knew the outcome of the game. "You tell me," he murmured. "You wanted answers. Isn't this what you came for?" A sick, shuddering horror crawled up Olivia's spine, twisting, tightening, making it harder to breathe, harder to think, harder to understand what was real and what was a nightmare slipping through the cracks of the house itself. But this was no dream. This was real. The thing took another step. Another. Closer. Its veil dragged along the ground, the tatters of silk whispering across stone, the sound so soft, so delicate, so utterly at odds with the way its presence screamed against reality. And Edmund did not move. Because he was not afraid. Because he had seen this before. Olivia's hands clenched into fists, her nails biting into her palms, her entire body screaming at her to run, but something held her there, something deeper than terror, something sharper than fear. She needed to know. Needed to understand. Needed to see. The candlelight flickered wildly, the air growing colder, thick with something unseen, something rising, something waking. The thing in the veil did not blink, did not hesitate, did not slow. It reached for her. And Olivia saw. The world lurched around her, the walls stretching, the shadows twisting, the house itself tilting as something deeper, something older, something buried beneath time itself pulled her downward, back, back, back into the past that had been clawing at her since the moment she set foot in Thornshade House. And then, she was not in the cellar anymore. The cold air dissolved. The candlelight faded. The grave, the figure, the horror of it all vanished. Olivia gasped, stumbling backward, but her feet did not find the stone floor. They found grass. The scent of roses and damp earth filled her lungs, the soft rustling of leaves shifting around her, the brush of the evening wind curling against her skin. She was in the garden. But not the ruined, overgrown garden she had seen when she first arrived. This was different. Alive. The hedges were trimmed, the paths clean, the flowers blooming in neat, careful arrangements, and ahead of her, a wedding. Her breath caught, her pulse slamming in her ears, the sound of laughter, music, voices filling the space around her, warm candlelight flickering in the trees, the glow of lanterns illuminating the edges of the garden where guests in fine gowns and tailored suits whispered behind gloved hands, smiling, watching. And at the center, a bride. Olivia's stomach twisted violently, her mind spinning, trying to understand, trying to piece together what she was seeing, trying to pull herself out of whatever this was, whatever this vision had become. The bride stood beneath the archway of roses, her veil cascading down in soft, shimmering layers, her hands clasped together as she gazed up at the man beside her. Edmund. Younger. Smiling. The same way he smiled at Olivia. The same way he had always smiled. This was their wedding. But not hers. Elisa's. A scream built in Olivia's throat, but no sound escaped, her voice trapped behind the weight of realization, the weight of horror, the weight of the moment she knew would come next. Because something was wrong. Elise was not smiling. She was trembling. Her lips parted, her breath uneven, her eyes darting toward something, someone, beyond the candlelight, beyond the whispers, beyond the celebration. Olivia turned, her breath catching, her blood running cold. A woman. Standing at the edge of the garden. Watching. Waiting. Her dress was pale, simple, a mirror of Elisa's gown but different, wrong, misplaced. She was not a guest. She was not supposed to be here. And the moment Elise met her gaze, everything shattered. The air rushed out of Olivia's lungs, the garden trembled, the lantern snuffed out, and suddenly she was back. Back in the cellar. Back in the cold. Back in the moment just before the thing in the veil reached her. The thing that was not Elise. The thing that had been buried beside her. And just as the skeletal fingers touched Olivia's arm, just as the whisper of its breath curled against her cheek, just as the truth unraveled before her, Edmund's voice sliced through the silence. "Now, Olivia. Do you finally understand?" She gasped, stumbling away, her pulse a frantic, erratic drum beneath her skin, her breath shallow, desperate, not enough, never enough, her mind still tangled in the past, in the garden, in the woman who had not belonged, in the second grave, in the second body, in the truth that was clawing its way to the surface. And as Olivia's eyes darted to the veil, as she looked again, really looked, as the thing in the tattered gown stepped fully into the candlelight, she knew. It had not been Elise who had died that night. It had been Edmund's other bride. And she was still here. Still waiting. Still buried. Still reaching for Olivia. Chapter 17, The Other Bride. The cellar walls groaned around her, the cold pressing against Olivia's skin, wrapping around her wrists, creeping up her spine like unseen hands reaching from the grave, like fingers curling around her throat, like breath whispering in her ear that she was not alone, had never been alone, would never be alone again. Her heart slammed against her ribs, her lungs pulling in sharp, ragged gasps, but the air was too thick, too heavy, too wrong, filled with the weight of something that had been buried for far too long, something that had waited, something that had woken. The veil fluttered in the unseen wind, the tattered silk dragging along the stone floor, torn lace hanging in strips, the skeletal figure beneath it standing too still, too silent, too patient. The moment she had turned, the moment she had seen, the moment she had understood, everything had changed. Edmund was not looking at the thing in the veil. He was looking at her. And the way he smiled, as if he had been waiting for her to realize. The truth clawed its way up Olivia's throat, raw, sharp, a scream she could not release, a breath she could not take, a nightmare she could not wake from because this was real, had always been real, had always been waiting for her to find it. The second grave. The missing body. The bride who had not been Elise. She felt it now, saw it now, the past unraveling around her, the walls shifting, the house itself whispering, remembering, revealing. This was not just a ghost. This was a woman Edmund had loved once. A woman who had worn a wedding dress just like Elise, just like Olivia, just like all the others who had stood beside him, smiling, believing, trusting, until they were gone. The figure took another step, slow, deliberate, a corpse that had been waiting too long to be seen. And when the candlelight flickered, Olivia saw her face. Not Elise. Someone else. Someone who had been forgotten. Her skin was paper thin, stretched too tight over bone, her lips parted as if in a silent scream, her sunken eyes locked onto Olivia with a grief so deep it could not be named, a sorrow that did not belong to the living. The remains of her gown hung from her frame in shreds, the fabric discolored, stained, ruined by time, by earth, by death. And yet, in the shadows beneath her hollow eyes, in the way she reached for Olivia, in the way her fingers curled like she was grasping for something just beyond her reach, she did not look angry. She looked afraid. Olivia's breath shuddered from her lips, her pulse frantic, her feet frozen in place even as every instinct screamed at her to run, run, run. But she didn't. She couldn't. Because this was not a ghost that wanted to harm her. This was a ghost that wanted to warn her. Just like Elise. Just like all the others before her. A sharp, jagged laugh broke the silence, and Olivia's body jerked at the sound, her heart stammering, her stomach twisting violently as Edmund exhaled, tilting his head slightly, studying her the way a man might study a butterfly pinned beneath glass, a specimen, a thing to be examined, something fragile, something that had nowhere else to go. "You see now," he murmured, voice smooth, steady, too calm. "Don't you?" Olivia's fingers dug into her palms, her nails pressing against flesh, trying to anchor herself, trying to keep from breaking, from shattering, from letting him see the fear crawling beneath her skin like something alive. Because now she understood. The house had been speaking to her since she arrived, whispering its secrets, showing her the cracks in the perfect story Edmund had woven for her, peeling back the layers of silk and lace and candlelight until all that was left was this. The truth. The body in the second grave. The bride buried beneath Thornshade House. The other woman. The one Edmund had erased. Her stomach lurched, nausea rising, memories snapping into place like pieces of a puzzle she had been missing, moments that had felt wrong before but now felt deadly. The way Edmund had not been surprised when she mentioned Elise. The way he had smiled when she asked about the past. The way he had known exactly where she had been that night in the garden, in the cellar, in the places she should have never found. Because he had planned for her to find them. He had wanted her to. The house had whispered to her, but it had not been the first time. He had brought other women here before. Other wives. Other brides. And they had all been buried. Olivia's stomach twisted, the weight of realization crashing into her, sending a violent tremor through her body, her limbs weak, her breath shallow, her chest tight with the knowledge that she was standing exactly where Edmund had wanted her to be. That she had followed his trail, his carefully placed clues, his unspoken invitation into the depths of Thornshade House. And now, she was trapped. He stepped closer, slow, easy, unbothered by the corpse behind him, by the woman who had once been exactly where Olivia was standing now. "You always were clever," he mused, tilting his head, dark eyes gleaming, amused, intrigued, pleased. "That's what I liked about you." Olivia felt bile rise in her throat, a cold sweat gathering at the nape of her neck, her fingers twitching, her entire body screaming at her to move, to fight, to run, but she did not dare turn her back on him, not now, not when she finally saw him for what he was. Not a husband. Not a man. A predator. One who had played this game before. "Was it Elise?" he asked, voice soft, patient, like a husband indulging his wife's curiosity, like a teacher waiting for a student to answer a question. "Or was it the other one who told you?" Olivia forced herself to stay still, to keep her breath even, to not let him see her break. But her silence was answer enough. His smile grew. "I thought so." He stepped closer. "You should listen to them, Olivia." Another step. Too close. His breath curled against her cheek. "They were all very much like you." Her pulse snapped. She ran. She lunged before he could grab her, before he could press his hands against her throat, before he could drag her into the grave he had already dug for her, the same way he had done to the ones before her. Her bare feet slammed against the stone floor, her breath coming in sharp, panicked bursts, her heartbeat so loud it was all she could hear, her vision swimming as she tore up the stairs, shoving the cellar door open, sprinting into the corridor. The house shook. The paintings rattled against the walls, the chandeliers trembled, the very air screamed as the unseen force that had been buried for too long finally woke. A wail rose behind her, the sound inhuman, broken, wrong, echoing through the halls, rattling the very bones of the house, and Olivia did not dare turn back, because she knew. The dead had followed her. And they were not alone. Chapter 18, The Dead Wake. The house was screaming. Not with words, not with voices, but with something deeper, something older, something buried beneath years of silence, of secrets, of blood. The very walls seemed to pulse as Olivia ran, her breath coming in sharp, frantic bursts, her heart hammering, her legs aching as she flew through the darkened corridors, her bare feet slamming against the cold wooden floors, her mind barely keeping up with the only thought that mattered: run. 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 The air was thick, suffocating, pressing in around her, curling against her skin like unseen hands reaching, pulling, clawing. The whispering was no longer soft, no longer distant, no longer the gentle, sorrowful voices of women lost to time. No. This was wailing. This was rage. This was the sound of something waking up. Something that had been buried alive. She turned a corner, nearly slipping as her fingers caught the edge of the wall, her vision swimming, her lungs burning, the weight of the house pressing down on her, too close, too much, too heavy. The chandeliers rattled, the paintings lining the halls tilted on their hooks, watching her, following her, their painted eyes gleaming in the flickering candlelight, their faces twisted in knowing, in warning, in mourning. A sharp, violent crash echoed from behind her. Edmund was following. He was coming. She could hear his footsteps, steady, unhurried, confident, the sound of a man who had done this before, who had hunted before, who had no doubt in his mind that he would catch her. Olivia's chest tightened. Her fingers curled into fists, her body screaming at her to keep moving, to keep going, to get out, get out, get out. But she could not leave. Not yet. Not without the truth. Not without finishing what the dead had started. The locket around her neck burned, the silver pressing into her skin, searing into her ribs like a brand, like a wound, like a reminder that she was not alone, that she had never been alone, that the women who had come before her had not abandoned her. They were with her. They had always been with her. She veered left, throwing herself through an open doorway, slamming it behind her, her back pressing against the cold wood as her chest heaved, her pulse thundering in her ears, the candlelight casting jagged shadows against the walls of what appeared to be a library, a study, a place of knowledge and lies and buried things. The scent of old paper and dust filled the air, the books stacked in perfect order, the large oak desk standing ominous in the center of the room, the window on the far side covered in heavy drapes, blocking out the moonlight, keeping everything hidden. She had no time. He was coming. Olivia lunged forward, her hands shaking as she grabbed at the desk drawers, pulling, yanking, searching, searching, searching. There had to be something. Something that would prove what he had done. Something that would tell her who the second bride had been. Something that would tell her why he had killed them. The first drawer slammed open, papers spilling onto the floor, ledgers, estate records, financial accounts, useless. The second drawer, locked. Her breath hitched. No time. She grabbed the heavy letter opener from the desk, its handle cold, sharp, gleaming in the dim candlelight, and jammed it into the lock, twisting, prying, breaking, click. The drawer slid open. And there it was. A journal. Bound in black leather, its edges worn, its pages thick with ink, with time, with secrets. Olivia's hands shook as she opened it, her fingers trembling over the first page, the familiar, looping script marking the inside cover, elegant, careful, damning. Edmund Thorne. Her stomach twisted. The pages were filled with names. Dates. Brides. She flipped through them, her pulse hammering, her breath catching, her fingers tightening as realization crashed through her like a violent storm. She was not the second. She was not even the third. There had been others. So many others. Pages and pages of them. Women who had once been his. Women who had once lived in this house. Women who had once worn the same ring she wore now. Women who had died. Olivia's breath came ragged, uneven, broken, her chest aching as she turned another page, her vision blurring, the candlelight flickering over the last entry, the ink still fresh, too new. Olivia Thorne. Her own name. Written before she had even arrived. Her hands went numb. A deep, cold horror settled into her bones, a terror so absolute she felt it hollowing her out from the inside, pulling her under, drowning her in the realization that she had never been his wife. She had been his next victim. The door creaked. Olivia spun, the journal clutched to her chest, her breath stuck in her throat as Edmund stepped into the room, calm, composed, untouched by the chaos unraveling around them. His eyes locked onto hers. And he smiled. "You shouldn't have found that," he murmured. "Too soft. Too gentle. Too pleased." Olivia's pulse snapped. She ran. She didn't think. Didn't breathe. Didn't hesitate. She just ran. The journal. The locket. The truth. She had it. And now she had to survive. The house shuddered around her, the floorboards trembling beneath her feet, the whispers rising into screams, into wails, into a storm of voices that belonged to the women who had come before her, the women who had died here, the women who would not let her die with them. The candlelight burst, the flames snuffing out all at once, plunging the house into darkness as Olivia threw herself through the doorway, down the hall, toward the grand staircase, toward the only way out, toward freedom. Edmund's footsteps followed. Steady. Slow. Certain. She hit the stairs too fast, nearly tripping, nearly falling, her breath ragged, her chest burning, the locket swinging wildly against her skin, the weight of every dead bride pressing into her ribs, into her lungs, into her mind. The front doors loomed ahead. Open. Waiting. And then, they slammed shut. Olivia skidded to a stop, her breath leaving her in a sharp, broken gasp, her hands flying out to brace herself against the wood, pushing, yanking, locked. Trapped. He was behind her. She turned, her pulse hammering, her stomach twisting, her throat closing as she saw him. Standing at the top of the stairs. Watching. Smiling. Waiting. And in the shadows behind him, the ghosts of his bride stood with him. Elise. The second bride. The third. The fourth. All of them. And they were all looking at Olivia. As if waiting. As if deciding. As if finally, it was time. Edmund exhaled, shaking his head, stepping forward, his voice still so damnably calm. "Did you really think they'd let you leave?" The house whispered. The floor trembled. The dead wailed. And Olivia screamed. Chapter 19, The Dead Take Their Bride. The scream tore from Olivia's throat, raw, ragged, full of every terror, every truth, every horror that had been clawing its way through the walls, through the whispers, through the blood-soaked bones buried beneath Thornshade House. The grand doors behind her remained locked, the wood cold and unmoving beneath her trembling hands, the locket pressing against her chest, a silent brand against her skin, a weight that was not hers alone, a burden carried by all the women before her. She turned, pulse pounding, eyes wide, desperate, wild, her breath ragged as she saw them, really saw them, all of them. The brides. His brides. They stood behind Edmund in the flickering candlelight, their forms twisted in shadow, half faded, half there, their veils tattered, their wedding gowns stained with dirt and time, their faces hollow, haunted, broken. Elise. The second bride. The third. The fourth. More. So many more. Too many to count. Their hollow eyes watched her. Their hands trembled at their sides. Their mouths parted, breathless, silent, waiting. And Edmund only smiled. "Do you see now?" he murmured, voice smooth, soft, as if he were merely entertaining a guest, as if he were not standing among the dead, among his victims, among the women he had lured into this house, bound to him in life, in marriage, in death. Olivia's stomach twisted, nausea rising fast, violent, the weight of their suffering pressing against her chest, sinking into her bones, wrapping around her like the house itself had woven its fingers through her veins, pulling her under, pulling her down. You were never meant to know, he continued, slow, unhurried, his footsteps echoing against the marble as he descended the grand staircase toward her, dark eyes gleaming with something sharp, something hungry, something pleased. But you were always meant to stay. Olivia's breath caught, her fingers curling into fists at her sides, her heartbeat a frantic, erratic drum against her ribs, her lungs fighting for air. Stay, she whispered, her voice hoarse, shaking, filled with something she refused to name, something she refused to let him win. He nodded, amused, tilting his head as if he had already won. You didn't think you were the first, did you? His gaze flickered to the journal still clutched against her chest, to the names written inside, to the truth she had pried from the shadows, from the past, from the grave itself. Names of the forgotten. Names of the erased. Names of the lost. All wives of Thornshade House. All his. Olivia's stomach churned. Her grip tightened around the journal, her breath stalling, the truth unfurling before her like a slow, suffocating noose. This was never about Elise. This was never about the second bride. This was about all of them. All the women who had stood beside him. All the women who had worn his ring. All the women who had trusted him. And all the women who had died. Edmund exhaled, slow, measured, stepping closer, his voice a dark caress. You think I buried them, he mused, his lips curving into something soft, something cruel. You think I killed them. Olivia froze. The air thickened. The house listened. And the brides, the dead, shifted. Their breath filled the silence. Their sorrow stretched through the walls. And Edmund laughed. But I didn't, he whispered. The house did. Olivia's pulse snapped. The whispering swelled. The walls groaned. The candlelight shuddered. And suddenly, she understood. The truth, the real truth, the truth that had been buried beneath her feet since the moment she arrived. Edmund had not simply been a murderer. He had not simply buried his wives when he had grown tired of them, when they had begun to suspect, when they had uncovered what he was. No. He had given them to the house. And the house had taken them. The very foundation of Thornshade had been built on their suffering, their sorrow, their sacrifice. The walls were woven with their whispers, their agony, their longing for escape, their wretched devotion to a man who had never loved them, only offered them to something greater. Something that lived in this house. Something that needed them to stay. Something that needed her to stay. Olivia's body went cold. Her breath turned to ice in her throat, her heartbeat thundering in her skull, her vision spinning as the veil finally fell away, as the reality of what she had walked into, of what she had been chosen for, settled deep into her bones. The house had never been haunted. The house was the haunt. The house had never simply held ghosts. The house had made them. And Edmund had let it. You were always meant to stay, he murmured, stepping closer, reaching for her, his fingers brushing against her wrist, the same way they had the first night they met, the same way he had touched all of them, the same way he had bound them to him, to the house, to this endless, eternal, suffocating curse. You were always meant to be mine. Olivia snapped. The journal hit the floor. The candlelight burst. The dead screamed. And Olivia ran. She shoved past him, her breath a strangled thing, her body moving before her mind could catch up, before she could fully understand what she was doing, before she could let herself be afraid. The house shuddered beneath her feet. The whispers rose to wails. The air turned sharp, cutting, violent. And the dead moved. The brides who had stood in silent mourning lunged, their veils ripping from their heads, their hands reaching, clawing, tearing toward her, their hollow eyes blazing with something new, something waking, something alive. Not anger. Not vengeance. Hope. They were not reaching for her to keep her here. They were reaching for her to make her leave. The realization slammed into her just as the house let out a sound, a low, guttural, inhuman sound, the sound of something ancient and starving and betrayed. Something furious. Something that did not want her to go. But she didn't stop. She would not stop. She hit the grand doors with everything she had, her fists slamming into the wood, her voice breaking, screaming, 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 until the doors blew open. The night air rushed in, sharp, biting, clean, the scent of roses and rain filling her lungs, the wind howling as if the earth itself had been waiting for this moment, for someone to run, for someone to escape, for someone to break the cycle, to end the curse, to leave the house behind. Olivia staggered forward, her vision spinning, her lungs aching, but she was out. She was out. And behind her, the doors slammed shut. The whispering stopped. The scream ceased. The air went still. And Thornshade House was silent. For the first time in centuries, it was silent. Olivia collapsed onto the damp grass, her chest heaving, the locket still burning against her skin, the truth still etched into her bones. Edmund was still inside. And so were they. But Olivia was free. For now. Chapter 20, The House Does Not Forget. The night air pressed against Olivia's skin, sharp and cold, seeping into the fabric of her torn gown, into her bones, into the cracks of her mind where fear still clung, where the echoes of the house still whispered, where the weight of what she had just done had not yet settled. She lay on the damp grass, her breath ragged, her hands digging into the earth as if to convince herself it was real, that she was no longer inside, that she had escaped, that she was alive. Alive. But the silence was wrong. Thornshade House stood behind her, towering, vast, endless, its windows dark, its doors shut, its presence still looming even now that she had fled. The whispers had stopped. The dead had stopped. The wailing, the screaming, the house itself, silent. Olivia's chest ached, her lungs straining to pull in the clean night air, to free herself from the suffocating grasp of Thornshade, but something inside her knew. She was not truly free. Not yet. Because Edmund was still inside. Because the house had not let him go. A shudder ran through her, a breathless, silent tremor that curled in her gut, twisted in her ribs, sent her heart slamming against her chest. She could still feel it. The weight of its presence, the heaviness in the air, the way the very ground beneath her seemed to pulse, as if the house itself was breathing, waiting, watching. But there were no footsteps behind her. No sound of doors opening. No sound of Edmund coming after her. Olivia swallowed hard, pushing herself up, her limbs shaking, her fingers still curled around the locket at her throat, her skin ice-cold where the metal pressed against her. The wind stirred through the trees, rustling the dying roses in the garden, the ones that had once flourished, the ones that had witnessed everything. The ones that had grown from bodies buried beneath them. Her stomach twisted. She turned, slowly, her pulse a frantic, uneven beat, her gaze dragging back toward the house, toward its silent, empty windows, toward the doors that had closed so violently behind her, sealing him inside, sealing all of them inside. The house had always taken what it wanted. The house had always been hungry. But Edmund had always been its master. Hadn't he? Olivia's breath hitched, her vision blurring, her thoughts unraveling, the weight of exhaustion pressing against her shoulders, making her sway where she stood, making her legs weak beneath her, making the ground feel too unsteady, too soft, too wrong. It wasn't over. She knew it wasn't over. She should run. She should turn away, flee into the night, escape while she still could, leave Thornshade behind and never look back. But her feet would not move. Her pulse would not slow. Her fingers would not let go of the locket. Because the house had not forgotten her. And she had not forgotten it. The dead had wanted her to leave. They had pushed her toward the doors, had let her escape, had given her the chance that none of them had been given before. But why? Why now? Why her? A sharp, brittle sound shattered the silence. A crack. A splintering of wood. Inside the house. Olivia's breath stopped. She turned fully now, her body locking into place, every nerve on fire, every instinct screaming, the darkness stretching, pressing, shifting, because something was moving inside. The floorboards. The walls. The house itself. The doors remained shut. The windows remained empty. But Olivia felt it. A pull. A whisper. A presence still waiting. Still watching. Edmund had not followed her. Because he could not. The realization sent a jolt through her, a flicker of something she could not name, something that felt too much like hope, too much like relief, too much like a victory she had not yet won. The house had kept him. The house had turned on him. The house had finally chosen. Olivia swallowed, her throat dry, her skin crawling with the sensation of being watched from behind the windows, from the locked doors, from the grave beneath the cellar floor. She had been meant to die here. She had been meant to be one of them. But something had changed. Something had shifted. The house had let her go. But why? The answer twisted at the edges of her mind, dark and unsettling, half-formed, half-realized, half-whispered in the cold wind. Edmund had fed the house. He had given it wives, brides, sacrifices. He had kept it full. But now, it had taken him. And maybe that was enough. Olivia exhaled sharply, pressing a hand against her chest, forcing herself to breathe, forcing herself to stay in the present, in her body, in the reality where she was still standing, still alive, still outside the house and not within its grasp. She had to go. She had to leave this place behind. Her limbs were still weak, her mind still reeling, but she forced herself to move, to turn, to step away, to put distance between herself and Thornshade House, between herself and the things that lived inside it, between herself and the man who had wanted to make her another ghost in its walls. Her fingers curled around the locket. Her bare feet pressed into the damp grass. And slowly, step by step, she walked away. The wind howled through the trees, carrying the scent of rain and roses, the earth cool beneath her as she moved, as she left the house behind, as she felt the weight of it slowly, slowly fade. But as she reached the edge of the garden, as she crossed the threshold of the grounds, as the darkened iron gates loomed ahead, she hesitated. A single thought bloomed in the back of her mind, sharp and cold and final. The house had let her go. But it was still there. Waiting. Silent. Hungry. It had taken Edmund. But for how long? Olivia's pulse quivered. Because Thornshade House was still standing. And houses like this, houses full of the dead, houses filled with grief, houses with ghosts woven into their walls, they never stayed silent for long. Chapter 21, A House That Waits. The iron gates loomed ahead, rusted and tall, their once grand design twisted with age, their metal worn from time and the weight of secrets that had never been spoken. Olivia stood before them, her breath uneven, her heart still a frantic, unsteady thing beating against her ribs, her hands trembling at her sides as the wind curled through the air, sharp, cold, watchful. She had made it this far, had torn herself free from the house's grasp, had escaped its hunger, its whispers, its walls thick with sorrow and ghosts. She had felt the weight of Thornshade House press against her back, had felt it shift, felt it breathe, felt it close itself around Edmund the way it had once tried to close around her. But now, standing here, standing so close to freedom, something inside her would not let her move. The house had let her go. But not entirely. The air around her hummed, silent yet alive, still tangled with the remnants of something unfinished, something unresolved, something that was still waiting to be answered. The locket pressed cold against her chest, a silent brand against her skin, a reminder of everything the house had tried to bury, everything Edmund had tried to erase, everything the women before her had suffered. And as the wind howled through the trees, rattling the dying roses, shifting the brittle leaves, the truth settled deep into her bones. It was not over. The thought curled around her ribs, sharp and certain, a weight she could not ignore, could not brush away, could not convince herself was simply fear lingering from the horrors of the night. Because Thornshade House was still standing. And as long as it stood, it would always wait for another bride. A shudder ran through her, violent and unrelenting, the reality of it crashing into her like a wave, drowning her in the understanding that even if she left now, even if she fled into the night, even if she never spoke of what had happened, never looked back, never set foot near this cursed place again, the house would not stay quiet. It never had. Not for Elise. Not for the second bride. Not for the third, or the fourth, or the ones after that. Not for any of them. And it would not stop now. It would find someone else. Olivia's breath hitched, her fingers curling into the fabric of her gown, her pulse hammering beneath her skin as she fought against the truth trying to pull her back, against the weight of all the voices, all the suffering, all the whispers that had pleaded, begged, screamed for release. The house had let her go. But the dead had not. They had given her an escape, had pushed her toward freedom, had broken the cycle that had trapped them for so long. But only if she ended it. The wind picked up, a sudden, violent force that sent the leaves scattering, that howled through the iron gates like a warning, like a demand, like a voice speaking in a language that did not belong to the living. She had a choice. Leave now, walk away, let the house wait for its next victim, its next sacrifice, its next bride. Or, burn it down. The thought slammed into her, fast and sharp, a wildfire catching in her mind, burning through her hesitation, her fear, her exhaustion. It was the only way. It had always been the only way. The house had survived because it was allowed to survive. It had remained because no one had stopped it. Because the women it had claimed had never been able to fight back. But Olivia could. She exhaled sharply, her body still shaking, her limbs aching, her mind reeling, but her decision was already made. She turned, slowly, deliberately, her gaze dragging back toward Thornshade House, toward its darkened windows, toward its looming frame, toward the walls that had swallowed so many before her, toward the ghosts that had trusted her to do what none of them had been able to do. And as she stared at it, the house seemed to breathe. The shadows stretched, shifting beneath the faint moonlight, the air pressing thick against her skin, the weight of it heavier now, sharper now, more aware. It knew what she was about to do. And it did not want to die. Olivia's chest rose and fell in sharp, uneven bursts, her breath clouding in the cool air, her body thrumming with something new, something she had never felt before. Power. Resolve. The knowledge that this time, the house would not win. She turned on her heel, moving quickly, her steps uneven at first, her mind still spinning, but she did not stop. Would not stop. She moved through the garden, past the dying roses, past the thorns that had once hidden the truth, past the grave where Elise still rested, where so many others had been left to rot. Not anymore. She found the lanterns near the old carriage house, found the oil, the matches, the tools that had once been used to keep the house alive, to keep it warm, to keep it welcoming. She would use them to destroy it. Her hands did not tremble as she carried them back, as she moved toward the porch, as she climbed the steps that had once felt like a threshold between her old life and the nightmare she had been pulled into. Now, they were something else. Now, they were an ending. The wind howled again, a violent, desperate sound, rattling the shutters, sending the branches above her swaying wildly, as if the house itself was screaming. As if it knew. Olivia did not hesitate. She doused the steps first. Then the door. Then the walls, the windows, the curtains she could reach, the furniture just beyond the entryway. She moved quickly, methodically, her breath shallow, her skin ice-cold but her blood burning, her pulse steady, her mind clear. This had to end. For Elise. For the second bride. For the third. For all of them. For her. She stepped back, staring at the house one last time, at the place that had tried to claim her, that had nearly erased her, that had buried so many before her. The place that had belonged to Edmund. But not anymore. She struck the match. The flame flickered. For a brief second, the house was silent. And then she dropped it. Fire rushed across the porch, across the oil-soaked wood, up the walls, through the open door, into the darkness, into the house's very bones. The wind roared, the flames snapping, devouring everything they touched, curling up the grand entryway, spreading across the furniture, reaching, stretching, consuming. And then, the screaming began. Not from her. Not from Edmund. From the house. A deep, guttural, inhuman wail, a sound that did not belong in this world, a sound that came from the walls themselves, from the foundation, from the very soul of Thornshade House as it burned, as it realized it was dying. Olivia stumbled backward, her breath catching, her heart slamming against her ribs as the fire raged, climbed, took everything. The windows shattered. The roof groaned. The house shook, trembled, collapsed in on itself, piece by piece, brick by brick, scream by scream. The ghosts did not wail. They did not beg. They watched. And as the fire reached the highest tower, as the last of Thornshade House crumbled into ash, as the wind carried the last dying embers into the night, Olivia finally let go of the locket. And the whispering stopped. Chapter 22, Ashes and Silence. The fire burned long into the night, flames clawing toward the sky, turning the air thick with smoke, with the scent of burning wood, with the remnants of a house that had held too many secrets, too many ghosts, too many lives that had ended long before their time. The roar of it filled Olivia's ears, a living, breathing thing consuming Thornshade House from the inside out, devouring its history, its hunger, its horrors, until all that remained was ash. She did not move. She stood at the edge of the garden, her body trembling, her skin streaked with soot, her lungs raw from the smoke, her fingers still tingling from the heat of the fire, from the moment she had struck the match, from the second she had set it all free. The flames reflected in her eyes, wild and unrelenting, a sea of gold and red and orange swallowing the dark silhouette of the manor, the structure collapsing in on itself, beams crumbling, glass shattering, the roof groaning before finally caving under the weight of its own ruin. The sound was deafening. The house did not go quietly. The wind howled through the trees, sending sparks spiraling upward, glowing embers twisting through the air before fading into the night, the heat pressing against her skin even from where she stood, but Olivia did not look away. She couldn't. Not until it was done. Not until there was nothing left. The locket at her throat felt lighter now, no longer a weight dragging her down, no longer a chain keeping her bound to something she did not understand, no longer a secret buried beneath the thorns, beneath the house, beneath centuries of silence. The house had taken so much. It had buried so many. But it would not take her. Not anymore. A deep, hollow crack echoed through the night as the last standing wall buckled, tilting, crumbling, sending a new wave of embers into the air, the last remnants of Thornshade House falling into itself, disappearing into the ruin she had created. Olivia exhaled, long and slow, her breath unsteady, her limbs weak, the exhaustion finally creeping in, finally taking hold, now that the fear was gone, now that the weight pressing against her chest had begun to lift. Now that she had survived. The house was gone. And with it, Edmund. The thought hit her all at once, like a blade slipping between her ribs, sharp and quiet, the reality of it settling deep inside her, cold and final. He was gone. The man who had nearly destroyed her. The man who had destroyed so many others. The man who had smiled when he told her she was meant to stay. He had spent his life feeding the house, binding his brides to its walls, to its bones, to its endless hunger, playing the role of husband when he had been nothing but a keeper of ghosts, a collector of lives, a man who thought he would never have to pay the price for what he had done. But the house had turned on him. In the end, it had chosen her. Olivia's chest ached, her breath hitching as she forced herself to look at the wreckage before her, at the smoking remains, at the place where he had once stood, where he had once spoken to her with that soft, knowing voice, where he had once touched her like she belonged to him, like she was another piece of the story he had written over and over and over again. But she was not his. She never had been. And now, he was nothing. A distant, brittle sound echoed through the trees, a sigh, a breath, a whisper. Olivia stiffened. The air shifted around her, the wind curling through the grass, stirring the ashes, carrying with it something else, something unseen, something that did not belong to the living. She swallowed hard, her fingers twitching at her sides, her body tense, waiting, listening, feeling the presence she had felt since the moment she arrived, since the first time she saw Elise standing in the garden, since the night she had opened the locket and seen the name that had been left behind. Were they still here? She turned slowly, her breath shallow, her skin prickling, her pulse uneven as her gaze swept across the garden, across the dying roses, across the shifting shadows cast by the last smoldering embers. Nothing. No figures in the mist. No veiled women standing beneath the thorn bushes. No skeletal hands reaching from the earth. No eyes watching from the darkness. Just silence. A deep, aching kind of silence. A final kind of silence. The ghosts were gone. Elise. The second bride. The third. The fourth. All of them. Free. Olivia let out a breath, her chest tightening, her fingers brushing against the locket one last time before she slipped it from her neck, the chain cool between her fingers, the silver glinting in the firelight, still heavy with the past but no longer holding her to it. She didn't need it anymore. Slowly, carefully, she stepped toward the roses, the flowers that had once hidden the truth, the place where the house had buried its sins. She knelt, her body aching, her mind light, her hands steady as she placed the locket in the earth. A whisper curled through the air, soft, gentle, grateful. And then, nothing. Olivia pressed her palm against the dirt, against the place where the dead had once waited, where the house had kept them, where they had been forgotten. Not anymore. She closed her eyes. For Elise. For all of them. And when she finally rose, when she finally turned toward the path leading away from Thornshade, away from the ruins, away from the horrors of what had been, she did not look back. She did not need to. The past had burned with the house. And she was free. Epilogue, the house that was no more. The road stretched long before Olivia, winding through the mist-laden trees, the sky above painted in the deep, bruised hues of dawn, a quiet promise that the night was over, that the fire had taken everything, that the house that had tried to consume her was now nothing more than ash scattered across the earth. The scent of smoke still clung to her skin, to the air, to the remnants of what had once been Thornshade House, but the weight of it was different now, no longer suffocating, no longer pressing, no longer filled with the whispering of the dead trapped within its walls. The ghosts were gone. The house was gone. Edmund was gone. She was the only one left. The wind curled around her as she walked, cool and soft, no longer howling, no longer screaming, no longer heavy with sorrow and things left unsaid, as if the very land itself had exhaled, had let go, had begun to forget. But Olivia would never forget. The locket had been left behind, buried in the place where the house had once kept its secrets, where the bodies had been hidden, where the women had once waited for someone to remember them. And now, they could finally rest. But rest was something she was still learning, something she had not yet found, something she was not sure she ever truly would. Because the past did not always stay buried. Houses like Thornshade did not just die, they waited. They lingered. They became stories whispered in the dark, warnings spoken in hushed voices, a ghost of a place that still existed somewhere beyond memory. And Olivia knew, deep in her bones, that though she had burned it to the ground, though she had destroyed what had tried to destroy her, it would never truly be gone. The fire had taken its body, but the house itself, its presence, its hunger, its echoes, still lived somewhere beneath the surface, beneath the soil, beneath the ruins left behind. It was only a matter of time before someone else found it, before someone else felt its pull, before someone else stood where she had once stood, staring at a place that should have never existed, feeling a whisper crawl beneath their skin, hearing a voice they did not recognize calling them home. But it would not be her. Not anymore. Olivia lifted her chin, her step steady, her body sore but still standing, still moving, still alive. She had survived. And that was enough. The road curved ahead, disappearing into the trees, into the unknown, into the rest of her life. And without looking back, without hesitating, without stopping, Olivia walked on.
Every story has an ending. But some mysteries live on. If you enjoyed this tale, don't let it fade into the shadows. Smash that like button and subscribe for more thrilling stories that will transport you beyond the veil of the ordinary. Subscribe to our channel and your name will appear at the beginning of our next video, where we will pleasantly thank you for your subscribing. Tap the bell icon so you never miss a journey into the unknown. Share your thoughts in the comments. What twists did you see coming? And what secrets do you think still remain? Until next time, stay curious, stay brave, and let the next story begin.